Peter, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me, Chris. It's a pleasure.
So, can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Peter Taylor. I'm known as the fraud guy. My history, I'm former police. I've spent most of my time dealing with traditional fraud. So that's like employee fraud, insurance claims fraud, and that type of thing. Worked for major UK companies. And then about 6 years ago, I got bored, a little bit bored with fraud, and decided that I picked up an interest, let's say, in organised cybercrime. So I looked at taking some qualifications, decided not to, and instead spend that money to fund the research project I did into organised cybercrime. I wanted to compare it with organised crime, as in drugs, and organised insurance crime, which is things like staged accidents, crash for cash type claims. And I just wanted to do a comparison. Without being too long-winded about it, is instead of taking an academic approach, which I think is too victim-based, I did it in the same way I would do a police intelligence gathering operation. So it was all around the principles of the intelligence cycle, qualified resources, corroboration, and everything else. And then that included, I did interviews with former cybercriminals. I did interviews with former fraudsters. I spoke to people in the counter fraud industry, the cybercrime industry. I did look at things like articles in Wired, which is always good. And I put together a research paper at the end of it, and then I got it peer reviewed by academics and cyber criminals and former. I'm serving police officers. And surprisingly, they told me I'd come up with stuff that they weren't aware of, and there was a bit of different thinking to the standard status quo. And then I've been really very, very busy ever since, helping people on, who are developing cybersecurity solutions, having cybersecurity problems, and having fraud problems. And I feel like I'm a cheat because I really enjoy it.
It's a very interesting, fast-moving, kind of evolving. Oh gosh, I hate to say industry field. Field is the right word for it.
Yeah, the speed it evolves at and develops, I've never seen anything like it. I don't think that's just cybercrime specific. I think it's the way of life now, isn't it? That we are developing at a faster rate. How things would change in 20 years now changes in 3 years, and so yeah, it's very dynamic. Yeah.
It's the cyber criminals are applying agile management skills to their organizations.
They are, yeah. I mean, they are the epitome of good business, because again, I've come from the corporate world, and they could teach the rest of the world a thing or two. Yeah.
So what were some of the things that stood out in your research that you were saying that when it was peer reviewed by people that are more victim centric in their approach, that stood out and caught their attention?
Yeah, well, as I say, most of the time we ask the victims for information, and we record data and we analyse that, and we come up with statistics, and you get such useless information that has been funded, such as, and I'm really apologise because I love a particular university. Well, they spent ages researching insurance fraudsters, and they came up with the fantastic, useless piece of information that the typical insurance fraudster was a 42-year-old male who wore a tie to work. Well, what a lot of rubbish, at the end of the day. Yeah, so what does the typical claimant look like? Oh, yeah, he's a 42-year-old male who wears a tie to work. Absolutely useless information. But, where does it really take you? So what I wanted to do was actually get into, I think a lot of people forget this, is they look at the victim. And that's not just the victim of, say, a fraud or cybercrime, as in you or I, Chris, they look at the victim, which might be, Citibank.
Yeah.
And that's where all the information comes from. What I think gets ignored is what could the cyber criminals tell us? What could the criminals tell us? Watch the criminal. That's where I come from a police background, and watching the criminals. So I wanted to watch the criminals. The most amazing thing I found was we know what they're doing. It's just so few of us know what they're doing, and so few people are acting upon it. It's actually out there if you've got the skills to go and find out what they're doing, because they're just so blatant. And as I say, because they're virtual networks with anonymous members, you can actually infiltrate the gangs.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got a crypto account and you know your security, you can infiltrate the gangs anyway. So all that information, I keep seeing warnings that the cyber criminals are watching us and they're really good at it and they study us, and they do. But we can actually do that too. But we don't. We don't do enough of it. So that was the first thing that I saw. The other one was I spoke with, okay to mention a name. This guy's a good friend and he won't mind me mentioning the name. I spent a lot of time with Brett Johnson, Gollum Fun, who, as you probably know, was one of the founders of Shadow Crew, who are the model used by most of the organised cybercrime gangs now. Spent time with him, and what I realised was, compared to the drugs gangs, who were sort of family or neighbourhood based, the organised cybercrime gangs are marketplace based. So it's like if everybody who used eBay was a criminal, they'd be the eBay gang.
Yeah.
So if you actually look at the cybercrime gangs, most of it, 80% of it, is built around marketplaces. Like Silk Road, Silk Road 3 or whatever they are now, probably Silk Road 33, because they keep getting closed down and popping back. Dread, Genesis, and all these marketplaces. But you can log on to these marketplaces and you can look and see what's going on. You can be really smart. You can scrape data. You can analyze that data. So there's lots of ways of finding that. But I had the pleasure of telling a good old American boy, which Brett Johnson is, that he was a communist. And he said, "What do you mean I'm a communist?" I said, "Because you actually work as a cooperative within these marketplaces. And what you do is, working with Brett, came up with what's called the cybercrime triangle. And this is something police have been interested in, which shows how the cybercrime gangs operate and how it's different to drugs gangs or whatever. They might be involved with drugs gangs, but certainly in the early days, it's getting tainted a little bit now. But the cybercrime triangle, 3 functions. Function 1, steal, hack, or get the data. Put it on a marketplace and sell it. Function 2, buy the data, enhance the data through maybe social engineering, and also crime as a service. So teach people how to commit cybercrime. Yeah, so these are the guys that commit the fraud. And then function 3, cash out. So turn the goods into legitimate assets. And it's as simple as that. That is, that's Genesis, that's Dread, that was Shadow Crew, and most of the gangs, they're actually structured that way in terms of the marketplace. Obviously, the exception to that, and the best rule has exceptions, is you've got the ransomware gangs. And one of the things I've seen increasing now, though, is the heist gangs, where, like the old bank robberies, you'd put a team together for a bank robbery. So you'd want somebody who could overcome alarms on that team. You'd want somebody who could blow the safe. You'd want somebody to plan all the logistics. An armory, somebody who's the armor, provides the armory. And then you want a getaway driver. And so, and then you've got, if you've got to steal gold bars, how are you going to get rid of the gold. So that's, to me, that's a heist. So that's
Yeah.
Ocean's 11 or Ocean's 8 or whatever. But now we're getting more and more cyber heists where you put a gang together to hit a particular bank, hit a particular business, or hit a particular organization. But the crazy thing is, sometimes they don't actually know who each other is.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a terrorist cell where you're brought together for a heist. So, those are the exceptions that prove the rule. Well, they are different to the sausage factory, very luxurious and expensive sausages. The sausage factory that is the majority of cybercrime. So those were the kind of things that I came up with back in 2017. I also put some warnings out, like I'd spotted that the cybercriminals were anticipating stronger customer authentication, which has been rolling out across Europe and the States and everywhere else, where banks, building societies, landlords, lawyers are a lot more careful about making sure that somebody authenticates themselves, as do online retailers. But in 2017, they were already beginning to create synthetic identities.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't creating them for use in 2017. They were so they would be doing things like creating emails, social media accounts, putting themselves onto electoral rolls and voters lists that nobody would notice they were on. So like student-let premises where lots of people were coming and going. But what that meant was by 2020 and 2021, they would have identities, non-existent or partial identities, that already had a 3-year history,
Mm-hmm.
that would pass lots of checks. And then COVID came along.
And everything goes virtual.
Yeah, and also they didn't need the synthetic identities. They could just carry on using stolen and cloned identities because there was so much free money about.
Yeah.
So if you look at one of the gangs, the Nigerian gangs, that were based in the US, who took something like $900 million of benefits from the US. They came unstuck, and again, you get gossip coming out. And the gossip that came out was that they planned to take 200 million, but they ended up taking so much that their infrastructure couldn't cope. For that reason, they made mistakes and errors that meant that the FBI were able to identify them. And I think they've been charged in their absence or even convicted in their absence. I'm not sure if any of them are actually in prison. But yeah, some crazy stuff's gone on. But you can really see now the use of those synthetic identities that have really thought and considered what defenses the good guys have got, and what they wouldn't expect to see. So it's like I'm going to say, obviously, the biggest advantage the cyber criminals have got is that they get shit done.
Yeah.
While the good guys go off and have a project meeting, try and raise funding, have another meeting. I've got hampered to a degree by data protection, regulation, and other laws. Whereas these guys have got complete free hand.
Yeah.
And can get things done in 24 hours. So that's a huge advantage.
But isn't that always the rules of warfare with the good guys and the bad guys? Is the bad guys always have no rules and the good guys have the rules that they have to fight with?
Yeah, that's the difficulty when you've got a uniformed army fighting terrorists, isn't it? Yeah, that's the big advantage terrorism has had. And there are places in the world where you can look and you can see it's quite easy to take over a nation, but you can't manage it afterwards.
Yeah.
Winning the peace is difficult because of those, because they don't live by the rules and you do. Yeah. So it is very much so the case. But I do think the good guys, I don't know, I feel like they need some advice. They need to come and talk to me and Brett and people like you. And there are other mistakes that I think are being made. And one is what I call the magpie syndrome of chasing shiny new things.
Hmm.
And again, I'm saying lots of things that some marketeers for vendors wouldn't like me saying. But what we seem to be doing is we've created what we call the cyber arms race, or the
Yeah.
identity arms race, and everything else. And people are getting that wrong, because the whole point of a race is that you get to the finishing line before the other person. But it isn't a race like that, because what happens is that the cyber criminals are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and we good guys and the good vendors try and are becoming increasingly sophisticated too,
Hmm.
to keep up with them. But there's actually a flaw to that, and what I think the flaw is, there are two flaws. Flaw one is that the more sophisticated areas of cybercrime, the more elitist, are actually a small portion, and that the largest portion of cybercrime is stuff that's 30 years old,
Yeah.
20 years old. Because one of the things that you probably know yourself with fraud and cybercrime is, it's weird, because when something new comes along, the old stuff doesn't stop.
Yeah.
So it's 2022, and I can go and steal your cookies for a site you purchase on, and trick that site into thinking I've passed the login check, the security checks, the bio checks, the behavioral checks. Yeah, we can do that now. So 5 years ago, that you'd have to be, I'm not going to name nations, but you'd have to be a nation states
Yeah.
intelligence services. So we've got that capability, yeah. But the old Nigerian, I'm a prince from Nigeria, I've got 25 million quid, which the first time I saw one of them, I think it was about 45 years ago. They're still going out there taking loads of stuff. So the people that are using the most sophisticated, the nation state standard things, they're quite small. So what we have to do is, we can't ignore that, and we've got to deal with that. But we can't stop doing what we used to do. What we need to do is improve what we used to do, which goes on, but we need to not forget, the most criminals will use the most common and familiar methods
Yeah.
to actually steal our money. So there are still people that are buying a username, a password, a credit card details, CVV code, and some basic information about you and committing fraud. So they are still around. And what we don't want people to, but what's happened is, I think people need to put the basics in place first, whereas I think sometimes they're chasing shadows
Yeah.
that aren't that important. If you've got all that in place, then yeah, you need to be working on the risks from bots and ransomware and everything else. But again, I do a lot of reviews, and I'm seeing people that haven't got stuff. They're putting stuff in now that they should be embarrassed that they've not had in place for 10 or 15 years. There's no point in embarrassing themselves. You've got to put that right. But they've got to be realistic about that. I mean, the one that makes me laugh most of all is my actual history, Chris, is behavioral psychology. How criminals work, but also how witnesses work, and how people fool themselves and trick others. And the thing that I've noticed is that I sometimes see something and think there's something else going on there. So I might be neurodiverse, or I might just be daft because I don't see the obvious. But the one that made me laugh was, I don't know if you know, I think it was global, but I'm not sure if it was just the UK. But a few years ago, our sales of vinyl records started to exceed our downloads. I
Hmm.
think that might be a global thing. Now, vinyl records went out with the arc. So we had vinyl records, then we had cassettes, then we had CDs, and then we had downloads. And downloads killed everything off.
Yeah.
So for everybody, it was the MP3 player, the iPod, the iPad, DAB radio, connect up, and everything else. And then vinyl records came back, and there was a big clinging to retro.
Yeah.
And then I started to see loads of random social media posts saying how good checks were and how people miss checks. And then people were saying, well, if you pay by check, it takes a week to clear. So it's not an immediate takeout from your account. And isn't it cool? And you can write with a fountain pen in blue ink and have a posh signature. So then the cool kids from certain places in New York and London, Soho and what have you, started to ask for checks because checkbooks have never stopped being available.
Yeah.
And then we saw the rise of the check. And straight away, we've now got the rise of check fraud, which is the easiest thing to do. So now people are back to stealing mail.
Yep.
They're back to stealing checks. They're back to insisting on checks because it was cool. And it's just created an old fraud. It's brought it back again when it had virtually died out. We have a comedy program, and they have a shop called the guy. This guy called Harry Enfield. He's a successful British comedian. He's very sarcastic, and he has a little shop in one of the posh areas of London where everybody's. It's called I've Seen You Coming. It's a shop, and people will go in and they'll sell them a twig for £500, because they think it's cool. And I honestly think, people like him were behind this. Let's make checks cool again, or let's at least encourage this thing about checks being cool. Because can you believe it's 2022? And we're seeing loads of alerts, warnings, and everything else about check fraud. Why? They shouldn't exist.
So why? So back to like the Nigerian scam. So why? You've known about it for 45 years. It used to be via fax machine and postal mail, and then it migrated to email. Why does it still work? Like everybody I talk to seems to know about it. So how does it still work?
Because
what's the psychology behind it?
Well, there's a psychology behind it in that it's always been about triggering emotions in the reader, and also almost like I'm doing some studies at the moment into spiritualists and mediums and how they do cold reading, and we can learn a lot from that. So I'll just make a note for myself so I don't forget an important bit. So we've got the psychology a bit, and then this is something that I want to come back to about why it works. Well, the first thing is you create in somebody some form of excitement. So that can be a negative excitement or a positive excitement. So you create some kind of urgency. Yeah. So first of all, there's an opportunity there. So there's an opportunity to get some money. Or in other ones, there's an opportunity to lose a lot of money. So there's a threat there. This is how, so we're looking about the Nigerian scammers. But we've got this huge thing at the moment going on of the extortion emails. I hacked your account and I've got a picture of you masturbating, watching porn. I've got your contacts list, blah, blah, blah. $1,000 will do it and I'll close it down. They haven't hacked your account. Yeah. So it comes back to the other one of picking up on what people are going through. So if you're sending out to a man, a male, particularly a young male, but that doesn't necessarily mean particularly young male, then there's the guilt complex, isn't there? Mm-hmm. Now, I actually was taught by monks. I went to a monastic school. And I remember on our first biology lesson, so it's an all-boys school, and the teacher came in, and we saw the first lesson around, human reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
So we messed around with plants and birds and bees for a while, and the teacher said, "Look, we're going to be talking about sex now, and we're going to talk about sex organs and things." He said, "So let's just get something out of the way." And he looked at us all. So this is a class of 30 12-year-old giggling schoolboys. 98% of males masturbate, and the other 2% are liars. Yeah, so he set the so it hones in on that people have got financial difficulties, or they're just a bit greedy, or they've got some kind of guilt going on somewhere. And then what a lot of them do as well is they will then put in something benevolent, that they want to actually give that to, give the money to other people, or they will say to you, I get lots of emails from Gaddafi's daughter. She's a lovely girl. She emails me regularly with 25 million. Then she really regrets what happened in Lockerbie. And she'd like me to take that 25 million and decide who deserves it in Scotland or anywhere else. So they hone into something. But then the other one is people's ego, that they are important enough to be contacted like that. So they create some kind of excitement. They hone in onto something that is a common personal feeling, and then they might even chuck in something in terms of benevolence. They'll put in some kind of credibility somewhere. So I know that they started when Gaddafi was killed.
Yeah.
So I know that Saif and I've forgotten the first name, that his children haven't been caught and are knocking about and might have a few million or billion possibly in their accounts. So it gives it credibility. Another favourite is lotto winners.
Yeah.
As soon as I see a lotto win, particularly a big lotto win, lottery win, I know that within 2 hours, people will be getting emails saying, I've won the lottery, and I want to give you £100,000 or $100,000. It's just an inevitable fact.
Yeah.
Because the fraudsters will use their spam lists, their scam lists, and their mug lists of people that have responded at some time in the past, and they don't need that many to do it. If you send 100,
that's the thing. It's
especially now you've got bots and everything else. They can just hit so many people so quickly every time with very little effort. So it's going to keep coming. But the other point I wanted to mention, Chris, and I think this is really, really important, and this is a message to every cybersecurity person, every counter fraud person that's out there that is watching this podcast, that is on Twitter, that is on LinkedIn, is on Telegram. Listen, guys. Most of the public aren't. And the ones that aren't, we've picked a network of connections and followers. So what we see, they don't see.
Yeah.
So and we've got this delusion that because and I do it, I try and create fraud awareness. So I'll put, that's how you and I come together. I'll put some stuff up warning people about particular types of crime or fraud. But I will always say to people, International Fraud Awareness Week, I said, don't put a post up warning fellow professionals. Go and talk to your mum.
Yeah.
Go and talk to your auntie. Go and talk to your uncle, because they won't see these posts. And you might actually do more good through that than putting something out on LinkedIn that gets, 200, 2,000 or whatever likes. And we suffer this delusion of this perception that because we know it, everybody knows it, and they just don't unless we tell them.
Yeah.
And I still think we would do, as I say, I do concentrate. My kids are aware, my kids' friends are aware. But again, they weren't. And it was something that only came to me, or I only probably realised about 4 or 5 years ago, that what we see is very, very narrow. So the public will keep falling for it. I mean, that's an interesting thing as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
We always talk about old people falling for fraud.
it's
Now it's not. It's people under 30.
yeah, it's millennials are now one of the highest targeted groups and falling for
Yeah.
certain scams more likely than other groups. I kind of
Yeah.
wonder, kind of shifting gears, and
Mm.
maybe this is good as a short term deterrent for
Mm.
cybercrime. Has the crypto crash reduced cybercrime? Because if you're, you had $100 million in cryptocurrency, and now that you've scammed out of people, now you only have 5 million or 2 million, or maybe it's worth nothing now. Is
Yeah.
is
Well,
turning that into real funds a problem for them?
it's a huge problem for them. And it always has been. Um, and I think there are two factors at play, and I think you're absolutely on the nose. You're a crypto, you're a cyber criminal. You've got loads of money in a crypto account, and now it's worth jack shit. Yeah, or it's not
Yeah.
worth much. Um, I've always said I'd rather see somebody lose the money or lose assets than actually go to prison.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I do think it's about the money. So we've got that, and I think that is significantly true. And it means that they've got to think more and try harder. The other side to that though too is, and this is really interesting, and something that came out again, and this has been a constant thing. It's not just come from when I did my research into cyber criminals. A lot of criminals, they reach a point of success where it's no longer about the money.
Yeah.
They don't care about the money. It's about their ego more than anything. And then we can break that down into various segments. So I can give you an example that isn't crypto. So I'm
Yeah.
just going to mention a drug dealer, a serious drug dealer who's now serving a very, very long time, who is local to me. He was arrested chasing a man down this local street with a machete. Yeah, because the man owed him £20. Yeah, it wasn't about the £20. It was having the cheek
Yeah.
not to pay him. So it was all about his reputation and his ego. And what I was told, I haven't corroborated this, but I was told by one of the officers on the case that he had a tin full of cash. Now the guy had been arrested. He's cooperated with everybody. He's done, the job's over. He knows he's going down for a long time. And he knows he got his cash. And they say to him, "How much cash have you got in that tin?" And he said, "Probably about 30 grand." And when they counted it, it was 120 grand. But they had no reason to pretend it was less because he got the cash to count. So he genuinely didn't know about £90,000 that he had.
He had so much money that he just couldn't keep track of it anymore.
But it's like Escobar, isn't it? Didn't Escobar? Wasn't there a room in New York or somewhere in America that was discovered where Escobar had stored cash, and the cash had rotted?
Oh,
It actually rotted away. So I think that's one thing. I think us normal people tend to think about money, but when you've got so much, it actually starts to mean so little. Yeah, you want the trappings, but it's actually about your ego. I've got a freezer. Yeah.
okay. Let's pick back up here. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So in summary, really, Chris, what I'd say is the biggest thing is that you've got people who could never understand what other people do. We've now got a lot of people who are really good at trying to get into fraudsters and cyber criminals' heads, but there is a drawback with that, in that we put our own standards into their heads So what we value, we put into their heads. Gets in the way a lot as well with investigations, is because people think, oh, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't go to that kind of trouble. And the real skill is to get yourself into the fraudster's head and the criminal's head. Because the other thing as well is they don't worry like we would worry about being caught. They don't worry the same way. There are two factors that I see for that. One is they think they're too smart to get caught.
Yeah.
And the other one, the driver, is short-term gain. So, if I can pull £4,000 on Tuesday and go out and take loads of cocaine and have a really good time, I don't particularly care if on next Tuesday the bank closed my account or the police come knocking at my door because I've had a good time. So I think we've got to understand other people's lives, lives that are different to ours, and that I think also we do live in different times. I think life's a lot more uncertain than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
We've got the whole gig economy, and I think that's enabling the cyber criminals to recruit in a way like they've never done before. I think you mentioned in our pre-call of how business-like they are.
Yeah.
They are actually the ultimate gig economy. I did jokingly suggest that a really good idea would be to just legalize cybercrime. Let them pay taxes.
Yeah.
And get them to go and teach governments how to make a shitload of money.
I mean, that always is one philosophy with a type of crime, that if you legalize the underlying issue, then you've reduced, you start getting taxes on it and doing everything above board.
Yeah. Well,
then it's easier to address.
Yeah, I live on. I work now globally. You've seen the LinkedIn fraud. Twitter app Fraud Guy UK. LinkedIn, I'm the fraud guy. Funnily enough, since the UK exited Europe, I do loads of work abroad now. In Europe, Africa, and places like that. But there are a lot of countries where you're on your own.
Yeah.
If you're daft enough to fall for fraud, then that's down to you. There is no support. There is no help. Sometimes there aren't even laws against it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you know, in Nigeria, the 419 scammers, who send out the emails and everything else, they can't be arrested unless they're actually caught doing it.
Which they're not going to get caught in the act.
No. So if I know you are a 419 scammer and you did it last week, I can't do anything about it. So laws are very different. And Ukraine's one example. A friend of mine works a lot in Ukraine, and just basically fraud's down. Their view on fraud is if you're daft enough, then that's your problem.
Yeah. If you chose to give away your money, that's your issue, not ours.
Yeah.
So do you see the I'm trying to think how to phrase this, that if you address both, like you don't address the methodology of the crime, you don't address was it a ransomware, was it a Nigerian scam, was it a phone call, was it a tech support scam? The methodology doesn't really matter, but if you focus on how the money gets in the system and how the money gets out of the system, there's only so many ways you can get money in and out. Does it make more sense to focus on the actual movement of money versus how the scam is being carried out?
Yeah, but there's no point in stealing the data, and there's no point in stealing somebody's money if you can't get it.
Yeah.
So it's like we used to say with burglaries, in my police days, if we wanted to cut the burglary rate in an area, we'd take the handlers out. So if the burglars didn't have anybody to sell the stuff they stole to, then burglaries dropped, and that worked. It worked really successfully in a team I was in. Really, we need to cut the lot out, and I think we will. But the thing that surprised me is if you actually speak to the banks, particularly, they really worry themselves about their ability to control money laundering.
Mm-hmm.
But if you speak to the criminals, they really worry about the banks catching them laundering money. So it shows, so it indicates to me that's got to be a priority area because
Yeah,
the criminals would, yeah.
I mean, because for my mind, I think of AI and machine learning.
Mm,
I have a very natural pattern of what I buy. How
mm,
much money I take out of the bank when I get cash. What money flows in and out of my bank
mm,
account. For most people, that's probably pretty normal. Like if someone has a
yeah.
job, that their pay is their pay. It's not like, hey, this week they
Mm,
got $100,000 and next week they don't get paid. They have a set amount of money that they get paid on a regular basis. If suddenly they
mm,
start doing, they've never done a wire transfer and they start wiring money in and out of their bank account,
yeah.
how is like to me as a layperson, I'm like, well, immediately that account should be looked at. Someone should call that person and say, hey,
Mm.
are,
What's
are
this
you,
about?
what's this about? I mean,
Mm,
I did have that happen once. I had sent money overseas to a family member, and
mm,
because the bank that I was previously using didn't do international wires, I had to open up a bank
mm,
account at a bank that
mm,
did international wires, deposited funds in it, and as soon as the funds, had seasoned, okay, let me wire it out, which as a bank that should look really suspicious. Account gets opened, money gets deposited, and immediately gets wired
yeah.
out. The bank actually called me and said,
Yeah.
hey, we noticed that you're wiring out a large amount of money. What's this about? Oh, it's a family member. Well,
Mm,
have you
mm,
met them? How do you
mm,
know
yeah.
you're wiring it to the I was both impressed and annoyed at the same time. I was impressed that they
Yeah.
asked all the right questions. How do you know this? How do you know that it really is your relative's bank account and not someone else
Mm,
pretending to be your relative? When was
yeah.
the last time you saw them? All sorts of
Yeah.
questions. Is
Yeah.
it that the banks just need to get, in a sense, more obnoxious about that sort of thing? And the
Yeah.
grocery store needs to be more obnoxious when someone wants to buy $1,000 of iTunes gift cards?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely. I'm the same as you. I've had it where I had a credit card that I used to pay for all my fuel, and that was all I used it for. So, yeah, because the business that I work with them, they didn't have fuel cards, so I just used it for that. But it was my credit card, not their credit card.
Mm-hmm.
And I was out. I'd left my wallet at home, but the card was in my car. So I used the car to buy a bunk bed. And then obviously I came up somewhere on the analytics and I ended up having to speak to them. And I was actually, yeah, to be honest, Chris, I wasn't irritated. And the person was quite apologetic, especially because they knew that I was a fraud investigator. And I said, I just want to be safe. I'm fine with that. And I was once taken off a plane in, where was it? In Los Angeles by the FBI or somebody or the US Secret Service because I've complimented the air marshal on his gun.
Oh.
I just never thought I like guns, and his gun was showing, which it shouldn't have been. And I actually jokingly said, "You shouldn't be flashing that. It's very nice, but you shouldn't be flashing that." Got on the plane, and I was taken off the plane again because apparently I'd scared the guy to death.
Yeah.
And this guy was really apologetic. Because once he worked out who it was actually why I was in Los Angeles and who I was seeing and who I was, but I said, no, honestly, it isn't a worry. I want to be safe. So we've got that. But I think it's quite lazy to think to yourself, well, are we actually speaking to the right people? And that's the value of quality analytics.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is as well is that worries me is over reliance on data.
Yeah.
So it's that there's a guy called I think he's called Frank McKenna who deals a lot with automotive stuff, and he always says is no matter how and he deals with putting IT based and automated solutions in, but there should be human supervision because
Yeah.
computers make mistakes. So there's the computer supervision, but also again there's the quality of your analytics providers, because you and I both know, Chris, right? You've got um, data matching, you've got data mining, then you've got machine learning, and then you've got AI. Yeah.
Yep.
But they're all dependent on what rules you put in. They're all dependent on the data sets that you're using. Some machine learning is great. Some of it is just you're similar to client D,
Yeah.
so we'll give you their rules. Yeah. And some AI is machine learning plus an extra couple of questions. So we need to be, and the problem is that people aren't always able to question and ask that. I mean, you want to see proof of concepts and things like that. But yeah, I mean, particularly analytics, how it spots the outliers.
Yeah.
The ones that just don't look right. I mean, it is the closest thing I've seen to magic, and I don't believe in magic. So yeah, it is great to have it, but it's also making sure that it's a good company that are using it. They've not just taken a piece of plasticine and juggled it about a little bit. They've actually created something that is different. And again, I'm seeing it at the moment with people now waking up to. So if we just talk about online retail for a second, there's so much emphasis on the transaction.
Yeah.
And so many checks go on around the transaction. But there's a hell of a lot more to that transaction. What happens before the transaction? What are they doing on your website? We've now reached a point from a technology point. We no longer need passwords and logins. There's far more reliable things to tell anybody whose website I'm on, or any organisation that I regularly log on to. Amazon, eBay, work systems, land registry, government site. They know it's me a lot more reliably than me putting in my password. So we're finally going to see the end of passwords, I think, in the next probably the next 12 months, as soon as that, because we've now got the behavioural stuff, and we've actually got behavioural stuff that works because it's behaviour. The flaw I felt when a lot of the behavioural stuff came in, it was only a transaction. It needs to be after the transaction. So I mean, certainly you can kill off a lot of refund fraud by running the same check, having sort of behavioural and bio checks when the refund's applied for, as well as when the purchase takes place. Because a lot of the refund fraud is crime as a service.
Yeah.
So the person claiming the refund isn't the purchaser. And it goes on and on after that. So yeah, I think seeing more of a holistic approach. So it's what is the life cycle of that transaction, what happened before the transaction, what happens afterwards. So I think there's a lot we can do. And I think the other one we're going to do is, if I can use, I'm not sure how old you are, Chris, and I'm not going to ask you in public, but when I first started in fraud, the reason I started in fraud was I was a police officer. Loads of cars were being stolen in the UK. Now, we've got a population, at the time, we had a population of less than 60 million. And we were having 1.5 million cars stolen every year.
Oh, my goodness.
Which is phenomenal. Now it's about 100,000. Yeah. Well, at the time, we were having 1.5 million. The reason that I got into fraud was I realised that a lot of those cars weren't being stolen. They were just cars that couldn't pass their MOT and were at the end of their economic life. So the easiest thing to do was, rather than pay to have your car scrapped, you'd put an insurance claim in and get the value of your car paid by the insurance company. So I could see that the insurance companies were going to get ripped off. Also in the UK, car insurance is completely compulsory. You have to have it. There are no states or whatever where you've just got to have it. Simple as that. So it's an enforced sale. So you've got all these people with insurance. Car comes to the end of its life. It's going to cost them £200 to scrap it, or they pretend it's been stolen and claim £3,000 or £4,000. Back then, I'm talking like 1990. What happened though was we spoke to the automotive industry, and I've got a neighbour company called Ford. Yeah. And we spoke to them, and said, how much do the locks on a Ford Sierra cost? And they said about £8.50. Now, the time of Ford Sierra was about £14,000. So you're spending £8.50 on locks, and they're all being, and they were being stolen, because that's a great thing about Ford. You want to hide behind something that really happens. And this hasn't become a car bus podcast. Please listen, because this really relates to cybercrime. So various things happened, but eventually Ford got a reputation that if you had a Ford, it'd be stolen.
Yeah.
And people didn't tolerate that. So various devices came out, and you might just be old enough to remember things like crutch locks.
Yep.
That connected between your clutch or your brake pedal and your steering wheel lock, so your steering wheel couldn't be used.
Yep.
Deadlocks on your car door, so that when you got out of it and locked it, nobody could get in without breaking the window and climbing in through the window, because the doors just wouldn't open again. And then we got transponders, where you paid for a transponder, which meant that you didn't just need the key, you needed a chip to start the car as well, and so on and so forth. So we had all these devices, but now the thing that caused the complete decline was in car theft, when it started to go down, 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 is the manufacturers included all that. Yeah. So, back in, again, probably the late 90s, early 2000s, you buy a Ford car, it's got a transponder built into the key. Click twice, it deadlocks, so it can't just be opened from inside. And the security massively improved on the cars, and car crime went down from 1.5 million to 100,000 and less than 100,000 a year. And I think the same is starting to happen with technology, where it's built in. So when you get a laptop, it's going to have a anti-malware, various protections and everything else automatically, and it will have to, or it won't pass sales standards, and things like websites and everything. The security will become obligatory, I think, is the answer. And I actually think that will reduce costs massively. Because you won't have. I believe in competition. I am a capitalist, But there comes a point with competition. If you've got one person doing something, they've got a monopoly, If you've got two, they start competing with each other. So they're out to do something better. They're out to do something cheaper, faster, better, cheaper. And you get that with three. But you've got 3,000 people doing the same thing. It then becomes a race to the bottom on price. And it also becomes, in order to accommodate that, corners get cut and the value decreases. So that capitalism kind of eats itself at a particular point. So I think for these things to be compulsory, I don't mind if it's 3,000, but I think we've got to protect the customers, we've got to protect the public, we've got to protect ourselves. And I think that will happen, actually. I am actually optimistic about the future, and I think we'll use Intel more. We'll use it in a better way, and I think we'll use it better for future planning. What we should be doing with Intel, in my view, is we should be using it to improve our products, not to develop our products, rather than sell what we've got now. Instead of coming up with sort of magic sound bites, that it's 10.5 trillion, and it'd be I use these sound bites. Cybercrime is heading towards 10.5 trillion dollars. If cybercrime was a country, it'd be the 5th biggest economy in the world. Blah blah blah, and they're all sort of really interesting facts. But really, we should be there's nothing wrong with saying that. There's nothing wrong with selling. But what we should also be doing is well, how can we stop it becoming 10.5 trillion? How can we actually add value to our products? I actually think we kind of need a new deal. Yeah.
That figure out something new. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
like if you think about it, like okay, if we could reduce that 10.5 trillion down to 1.5 trillion, let's reduce it by about
Yeah.
90%. If our cost of goods and services went up just by a little bit in order to counteract fraud, I think most people
Yeah.
would be okay with that.
Yeah. Well, the fraudsters are taking what, 5.5 trillion. So if we could cut them down to a trillion, we save the world 3.5 trillion. And we might have lost 2.5 trillion, but we might lose the crap. And then that 2.5 trillion can go into the good.
Yeah.
So the good guys can get better. But the other one that is interesting is if you look at countries that are impacted by fraud, I've been working with Nigeria, the Central Bank of Nigeria, and people like that. And when you actually meet those people there, it's easy to laugh about the Nigerian prince and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
There are people there, they're devastated by the reputation their economy has. And the truth of the matter is, it was really bad 5 years ago, but and it's improved. But I'm sorry, but UK, US, EU, Oz, we've all got worse. We're nearly as bad as they were, and they're kind of like trying to improve it, but it really destroys their economy. In Nigeria, you cannot get a credit card.
Yeah.
You imagine the US and UK without any credit cards and the impact that would have
The
on
economy
your
wouldn't
economy.
it wouldn't work.
No, you can't get credit. It's really hard to get mortgages and everything else. Because most of it is because of their reputation and their corruption. But what I do know is that they actually did something really good a few years ago, and they rewrote their laws so that they were simple. And the other thing that I like about it is they kind of brought it all together. So it isn't just about cyber fraud, money laundering, and everything else. It's also about things like smuggling, anything that hits the economy. And actually, that's actually following the US model. The US Secret Service is there
Mm-hmm.
to defend the dollar and defend the economy. That's something we don't really have in the UK. And I
Mm.
think we can learn from you, and we can also look at the fact that the Nigerians have, I think, copied the US Secret Service model,
I
and
mean,
they're doing better out of it.
I sometimes wonder, and this is always one of those
Mm.
liberal versus conservative viewpoints. Is you talk to a lot of the low level criminals. It's
Mm.
I'm just trying to feed my family. I'm just trying to
Yeah,
make ends meet, and what can we do as wealthier countries to help a country like Nigeria bring
yeah,
people up out of poverty where they can have stable jobs and not have to participate in crime, because I think most people are inherently good and would rather have a legitimate job working
yeah,
9 to 5 paying their bills and supporting their family as
yeah.
opposed to participating in a criminal organization.
But if you look at um, parts of Africa with poaching, this is what they've done with poaching. They've invested in businesses in areas where people resort to poaching. So it shows it works. Look at the whole problems around Northern Ireland, and the troubles. America invested a load of money in Northern Ireland. We got a Good Friday Agreement. Okay, things aren't perfect, but they're a hell of a lot better than they were before. So yeah, there is that. The only thing I've got to say, Chris, though, is I still think that there are a lot of criminals who use things as an excuse,
Yeah.
and that you've got to be responsible for your actions. And one thing that I certainly see is I see people who you would think might resort to crime that wouldn't. I see people who would rather let the children starve than commit crime.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, I would never let my children starve rather than commit crime. But you've got to be honest about that. And I think that the old excuse, well, society made me a bad guy.
Hmm.
I kind of don't accept that, because there's loads of people that have had suffered the same things from society, and not become bad guys.
Yeah.
But I do think, yeah, it's a lot bigger. We've got to give people a reason, haven't we? There's got to be work. I mean, certainly I found, again, just going from my policing days, we had one of the towns we called was a little town called Urmston, and it was a bit of a joke that all the police wanted to work in Urmston because it was a crime-free zone.
Hmm.
Nothing happened. Hardly any burglaries happened. There was hardly any crime. And the simple reason for it was you could walk to Trafford Park, which was one of the biggest industrial estates in the northwest of England. And the people in Trafford Park liked employing people from Urmston because they knew they wouldn't be late for work. So, you know, yeah, you know, you know, there are circumstances and opportunities, and we can do a lot better for people. And as I say, it's giving people a stake, isn't it? And things like 0 hours contracts, the gig economy, you know, that works for some people, but the gig economy is very like self-employment.
Yeah.
And they do say that only 1 in 10 people are suited for self-employment. You know, imposing self-employment on people that would rather just have a job, a paycheck, come to work after hour for dinner. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, that is the majority of people. Then I think we can do better. I just hope we do better, because we can't carry on like we are, which is this constant growth cycle, but increased corruption, money laundering, and crime, which we're going to. I mean, to me, again, I'm sorry if I'm like 1999, everything seemed all right. And if you watch The Matrix, one of the things that comes out of The Matrix is I believe there's a quote somewhere in The Matrix: everything went wrong in 1999.
Yeah.
it just feels that way. You know, 1999, I feel like the world peaked. We just seem to be getting so much wrong since that, you know, you couldn't even get it that wrong by design. You know, we just seem to have made so many mistakes, I think. And you can't put the blame on any single country, because it is global, isn't it? I mean, even countries like the Nordics, who have got this fantastic reputation for honesty and integrity and everything else, you know, and people look up to that. But then somebody will go around with a gun and shoot 124 kids on an island. So, you know, none of us have got it right, have we?
No, we all got to work together to make it better for everybody.
Yeah. School report must do better. Tip. The world, and all we can do is do our bit, isn't it? And just try our best.
Yep.
Okay, mate.
So as we wrap up here, if people want to find you online, where can they find you?
Yeah, the easiest thing is to Google Peter Taylor, the fraud guy, and I should be on page 1 or 2, hopefully, and that's without SEO. I participate a lot on LinkedIn and Twitter. Got my own website, but you'll find that by doing that. The simplest thing is to Google me. The other one is I get people contacting me and saying, I know you're busy, but never worry about that. I'm never too busy. If I can help somebody, or, you know, somebody wants to know something, always happy to share.
Awesome. Peter, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
My pleasure.